Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to sit tonight and talk to Jessica Moore about her narrative poem, The Whole Singing Ocean, and I'm so excited to have her here, and thank you all so much for joining us. Before we officially get started, I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of land, and feel free in your own personal way to acknowledge where you are. If you'd like to share something in the chat, also feel free to do that. Jessica and I and Kaylee are in Tekaronto. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Wendat, Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. Jessica Moore, welcome back to Junction Reads. I'm so excited to have you. I'm so excited to talk about The Whole Singing Ocean. But before we get into you, can we talk about what you're reading right now and any books you'd like to recommend for everyone here?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Allison, and Junction Reads. It's so great to be here. And when you asked that question of what I'm reading, I looked at the pile of 20 books on my
Yeah.
nightstand and chose a couple of them. So I'm reading two books by two friends right now. One is Householders by Kate Cayley. It's this excellent luminous collection of stories. And then I'm also reading The Second History by Rebecca Silver Slater, and it is gripping. I am staying up way too late reading it. Have you read it?
No, someone just posted something on Instagram a few days ago, and is it historical or is it a historical thriller, or is
It's
it just?
future. It's set in the future.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, and so there's a lot of wilderness and living after some kind of fallout and apocalypse, and then finding a way towards something new, but beautifully written.
Nice.
Yeah.
Like that. I need more future. I need more history, to be honest. I need to start reading more history, but I'll take the future. I'll take the I'll take the past, or I'll take the future. Not right now, not the present.
Yeah.
Um, so I am thrilled that you're going to read something from The Whole Singing Ocean to share with everybody. But before I
My
do
friend
that, do
Jessica,
you mind if I share your bio?
Writing this in the coffee shop.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're all muted. Do you mind if I read your bio for everybody?
Oh, sure.
Okay, good. Jessica Moore is an author and Booker-nominated literary translator. Jessica's first collection of poetry, Everything Now, was published by Brick Books in 2012, and it was called A Powerful Journey Through Love and Loss, serving ultimately to unsettle any notion of a boundary between them. The book is partly a conversation with her translation of Turkana Boy from Talon Books, a poetic novel by Jean-François Beaudemain, for which she won a PEN America Translation Award. She is a former Lannan Writer-in-Residence and Banff International Literary Translation Center alumnus, as well as a former VP for the Literary Translators Association of Canada. Her translation of Mélie de Kerangal's moving and unusual story of a heart transplant, Mend the Living, was longlisted for the 2016 Man Booker International Prize and won the 2017 Wellcome Book Prize. Jessica lives in Toronto with her family. Jessica.
Great. So I'll just introduce the book, The Whole Singing Ocean. It's a book with many strands, and I often am struggling down to the last minute to figure out how to give the right kind of glimpse into it. But just to set up the story, it is a true story told in poetic shards, and it began with a moment that a boat builder told me about his encounter with a whale and swimming to look in the eye of the whale. He was at the time, he was really young, and he was attending a French countercultural boat school, and he looked back on that time as this unbelievable, free, and like unmatched time in his life of adventure. And in the 8 years between him first telling me this story, which I carried around with me as like a kind of talisman, um, and then running into him actually completely by chance 8 years later, there was a lot that had surfaced in the interim about the boat school, and the director of the boat school was had a number of criminal charges laid against him and had been taken to court more than once. And so my friend, the boat builder, who doesn't really speak French. He had been on this French countercultural school as a child, but hadn't carried his French through. And so he knew this was happening, but sort of needed a translator to access what was actually happening with the story of the boat school. So I started to accompany him in his discovery of events, and then the writing, the story itself began to lead me in a way, and story in the book becomes a kind of character. And all these twists and turns and new strands come in, ecological grief and the plight of the oceans, and then also echoes and elements of my own childhood and things from my mother's childhood find their way into the book, and the ways that trauma is passed along. And so I'll read right from the beginning of the book, and hopefully give a glimpse of what it's like. Thanks to everyone for being here. It's so nice to see people's faces. The whale. The dreams began when I was still a child, always from shore, always racing to see them, leaping dark joy in waves hurled through with light. So when the boat builder invited me onto his boat and told me his story, I listened. We were lying side by side in the hull. The sea was calm but stirred, bubbles sounding along the wood like the whir in a vast aquarium, and there we were, specks inside. Long before building his own boat, he'd apprenticed on board a marine biology vessel. Being the youngest, he was chosen to be towed behind, diving mask on, eye out for them. If he saw one, he was to tug the rope as a signal. And me, many nights I dreamed. Awe was in every dream, and sometimes it was the kind that makes the hackles rise up, and sometimes it was the kind that opens wings. This day he'd been trawling along thinking of music, jazz, the near impossibility of true improvisation, real randomness, because how can you trick yourself into playing something new? Patterns pull us, patterns form us, form our slow sleeping states, our waking ones too, unless we keep wildly alert, on the lookout. Curled facing each other, I confess I'd wished on the ferry crossing to spot one. Seeing a whale was a fathomless want, the kind you carry in childhood. Once, in Newfoundland, I boarded the whale-watching boat, and then nothing, only the dismal puffins on their shit-covered rock. Fog so thick I could have choked. I burst into sobs inside the car, slammed my hands against the dash. His hands and mine between us, though we have both been inside a greater love, a greater grief. Still it's comfort, in the presence of something far more vast than ourselves. And I remember 1,000 times believing the dark was good, descending to meet it like trees to their roots. And I remember 1,000 times believing that it was not. Sometimes night is the surest thing there is. After the whale-watching boat, I took the coastal road down the peninsula, following a hunch, parked the car past a narrow causeway. When I'd been walking the mist-pinned beach no longer than 20 minutes, the fog lifted, revealing the fins of them, tens of them, just meters offshore, so close I could hear it, the breath of whales. And on this day, he tells me he did see one, a mother humpback looming up from the depths beneath. He reached for the rope overhead, and here is where the story goes slant. Remember the tale of the mouse and the whale? Not sure I know that one. You do, I'm sure you do. One of those tear-jerking kids' books. Tell it to me again. The mouse is all alone in the immensity of the sea, yes. Alone and thinking of what it means to be a speck in all that vastness. Bit of a philosopher, that mouse. feeling alone and insignificant, as we all are wont to do sometimes. And then his boat capsizes and he's full of fear, but the whale comes to save him. Yes, I remember it now. Have you ever lain on the surface of the water and felt the pull? In the moment when he reached overhead, his instinct was not to tug the rope, not to signal, but to locate the metal of the clasp and release it. Where a French word might be useful, you find yourself face down in water with pewter skies pressing low, grisaille, and the long, low ocean pressing back, miroitant, showing the sky its own face and gleaming, the thrum rumble of slow motor pulling you along by a rope, eye on the depths. Each inch of your narrow body sleeked inside wetsuit except for face and hands, each meter of water balened, and if you see one, reach overhead, tug the rope, signal to the mate on board so he'll call out to the captain. Except for the rumble, it's quiet, and in spite of the forward combing, there's stillness. You are moving still through vastest gray, thoughts careening to Django's guitar, water-cold fingers feeling out jazz chords till there sings out a new sound, brief, but for that moment all. Coming at you all-sided, all-filling, and you see her, rising like an arpeggio from the dark. Then there are no thoughts. Overhead your hand clambers, and reaching the rope rather than tugging, you unclip, swim free. Unlinked now to the human world, you dive down toward the fins, the dark and gleaming body, the broadly turning being filling up your view. You glide, lungs pounding, till you find the eye. You have never seen an eye such as this, so large, asking nothing. And then there you are, just you and the whale. With her, you are the vast, mirroring sea. You are the whole singing ocean. You are beheld, held in that eye, and you are whole. Warning shot across the bow. Years later, I was driving up Highway 101, and when I got to San Francisco, I stopped in to see the boat builder. He lived in a northern suburb now with his wife and baby. He had a wide and easy smile like before, but I didn't remember him being such a nurturer, stirring pots on the stove, asking after the boat builders at home. Once we were all sitting down to dinner, I told him I'd been writing about that moment with the whale. He must have been chuffed. His eyebrows went right up into the creases on his forehead, growing taller as the hairline skulked away, lines clean and even like the planks, oh no, don't say it, on a boat. Ugh. Really? Said the boat builder, the corners of his mouth loose and grinning, and his eyes went here and there as though searching for the reason I might have done such a thing, or combing memory to find the night when he had told it to me. I've been thinking about that time a lot myself, he says. Something in me closes up at the same time that something else shifts forward, curious, digging. I have carried his story for so long, and the way his face has changed, almost apologetic, looking side to side and then at me, makes me freeze. All the articles are in French. I've been waiting for a translator. So what was the story? Oh, it's awful, like something you've held as beautiful for years has just been peeled back to reveal what happened. And that's just me speaking. Imagine what it was like for him who actually lived it. What happened? There's such a particular violence to the kind of rearranging you have to do. Just spit it out, would you? He fleshes out a scene I never remember hearing before, not a marine biology vessel after all, and not just a boat, but rather a French traveling school of sorts, whose base at the time was a shipwreck miles from anywhere. The Silver Bank, haven for sea mammals, where the great Atlantic trench rises to a mere 40 feet deep, where the whales migrate every year. They anchored and occupied the end of the wreck not submerged, read and studied and slept there, cooked bread in the old galley stove knee-deep in water. It sounds jagged, rusting and dangerous. The kids cooked, cleaned, kept ship, kept lookout, Their limbs were tanned and muscled, and the water was bleached turquoise, lightening to white. He was there for 5 months. He was not the youngest, and with only grade school French, he was not inside the inner circle. Lucky. I never saw it, says the boat builder. It never happened to me. They said years later of the children they had been, 9 to 15 years old, that they didn't want to disappoint Leo. Leonid Kamenev, 78, then 56. Captain of the Carrick Ven, an antique sailing ship built in Brittany, the ship that carried, over the course of 12 years, 400 pubescent boys and 60 girls to the shipwreck, the Polixeni, in the Azores Islands. Former child psychologist, Foucault enthusiast, desirous of developing a system and a forum to abolish the separation between adults and children. The children were rulers, were golden, removed from every signpost, every repère, and from there they could see wild storms roll in, and from there they could see humpbacks swim, and from there they could see the dark movements of the moon and of transparent overlapping selves. They were creating a new world. I thought I was free, said one. Nothing is sharp, nothing is black and white. God, some things are, they have to be. Said Foucault, don't ask me who I am or tell me to stay the same. I'm starting to get that murky feeling. I know. Let's talk about the wind for a while. There is a wind system called the Nortada, caused by the anticyclone of the Azores. During periods of the Nortada, the warmer top layers of water are pushed out to the open, and cold swaths from deep down take their place. This means the top layer of the ocean becomes unusually nutrient-rich. This means constant movement. This means frequent fogs. And fog does just what it has always done. The Azores, last vestige of sooty-winged puffins, so they were there too. Nests among the honeystone, nests among the calendula. In French, the flower is called souci, which also means trouble or worry. Someone in their testimony called the wreck the perfect trap. Kamenev justified himself through Foucault. He was an educated man. So I've been reading about Foucault since you mentioned him, and what have you found? Mostly just that he was a slippery sucker. Scholars tend to wind around things when they speak of him. They have trouble pinning him down. Pin him, linchpin, kingpin, kingfisher. If there are cormorants, are they mostly in the mornings? If there are mornings, are they moored to kingfishers? If there are no moorings, is the boat, the hurt, real? The hurt is always real. Anything can be the trigger, backward down a binding path. One man from the wreck named the smell of nutmeg, limes. The whole world becomes perilous. We don't speak of so many things as though by keeping quiet we keep ourselves safe, ourselves or them. A few brave or tired ones came forward, tired of dragging this quiet thing around with them, tired of fighting the slippery path in the middle of love, in the middle of the kitchen rife with citrus, green rinds wrung dry beside the knife. From the top of the mast, the sea was a jewel, green, soft and stroking and numinous, buttressing mysticism. From up there you might look and ask, lucid, am I dreaming? Receiving no answer, desiring no answer. Come evening, the sea shows a bluer face, still and smooth, and I think of Cézanne, how closely he leaned in, painting the same mountain again and again and again, coming to know it like a child or a lover, not both.
Thank you so much. I mean, I would have been happy with you reading anything from The Whole Singing Ocean, but I'm so glad that you read from the opening. I was going to open by talking about structure and language, which I think I'm going to come back to because this excerpt that you read and the dialogue, the conversation with the boat builder really speaks to what exists in the whole singing ocean in a number of different ways. Are these binaries of good and bad, and the before and the after. And there's a line repeated: nothing so horrifying as something different in the shape of someone you know. And I want to talk about that in two ways. One, in how you can see someone or see an experience with that rapture, with that goodness, with that positive experience, once you've seen it in a different way, once you've read it in a different way. And I'm assuming the boat builder read, a number of different experiences as he was going through, witnessing the trial and witnessing all of that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to talk to you about that and how you experienced or explored that in the writing.
The sort of the divide of the
Yeah, like
what rapture is
yeah,
good.
having grief and yet also having so many, great memories, or having experienced something terrible, but all of these positive things are tied up into it. And I wanted to talk
Yeah,
about how you explored that.
yeah, yes. There's so that's the heart of the book right there. And there's so many ways I could come at that, but just to say first that when you were asking the question and I was thinking about the boat builder saying, and I read the line a couple of times here where he said, I never saw it, it never happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a kind of the worst did not happen to him, but as we together
Mm-hmm.
unearthed things, other things came up where he did remember things. So I think there's an element of the traumatic where it can get, we know this, right? It can get boxed away so that
Yeah.
we can go on with living and with living beautiful things.
Mm-hmm.
And even through all of what did come to light, and Kamenev was convicted, and even through all of that, I know that the boat builder still looks back on that time as this incredibly liberating experience, and still the grandest adventure of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the like when I first started engaging with the story and writing it, it was only the first part. So up until him swimming to meet the eye of the whale, and I was head over heels in love with that story. And then when I learned that there was this really dark underbelly
Mm-hmm.
further story, I didn't want to go there at all. I actually really resisted it, and then sort of sat down with what we had discovered and sat down with the necessity or not of telling it, but asked that question of the story, and gave
Mm-hmm.
myself and the story 3 days to see and to start writing towards the more knowledge and the darker knowledge. And it quickly became clear that it was necessary to follow, but I wanted to find some way where the next piece didn't cancel out the gorgeousness of the before. um, and that feels like one of the great human questions. How can we continue to hold something that was gorgeous if
Mm-hmm.
something terrible happened after?
Yeah. And especially that the story of the whale and him, choosing to
Yeah.
swim alongside the whale, and that is magical, right? Like, how can you, and it feels like there was on, and I don't want to speak for him, but a resistance on his side to really let the trauma in, because would that then erase that magical experience?
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't have the book also has pictures, and there's a picture of him and another boy jumping off the front of the boat, I think it is. And just looking at that picture, I thought, and I'm a water person, just looking at that picture, I was like, wow, the incredible experiences they must have had, and how tragic that they were stolen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and how has he then come to deal with it? But again, that unfolds in the story in a way that I don't think we should talk about more.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, it was powerful for me just in imagining grief and trauma and all of our life experiences. So
Mhm.
I thank you for that.
Well, and I feel all too like that question of how to hold the two is so present in something like what I know we're going to talk more about the oceans, but
Hmm.
anything to do with environmental devastation. How do we keep loving the world? You know, because we have to keep loving the natural world, and then
Yeah,
and to not, yeah, to not be completely sunken by the terrible things that are happening, but to hold a kind of buoyancy. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And that I wanted to let's just talk about the another aspect of the novel that I wanted to talk about and is referenced is the looking, the seeing, and the seeking that
Mhm.
happens. This whole who are we as people? And speaking of the oceans, there's the a couple of scenes. One is and I think you as narrator talking about discovering that organisms have developed a way. I think it's organisms have developed a way to, or they're adapting in ways to digest plastic, and how that is hopeful in a
Mhm.
way, even though we really shouldn't be that hopeful.
Mhm.
And then the scene with the DJ at whale music, I think it's whale music or a whale installation at an art gallery, and he's sitting there playing whale music as a DJ for this event, and beside him are two small disposable plastic water bottles.
Yeah.
And that, how in writing the whole Singing Ocean do you think, or how can you get a reader to not see, but to want to seek, to want to look for ways that we can do better, and not just when it's right in front of us, when we're looking at a plastic island or when we're seeing plastic on the beaches?
Mm.
I mean, I know that's a big question, but
Mm. Well, to go to the piece of the question that's about the seeing and seeking and looking, I feel like that the visible and the invisible
mhm,
and the being beheld is a huge uh, thread through the book. And there, there's the beholding the whale and being beheld by the whale. And then when I veer into pieces of my own childhood, there's
mhm,
this really kind of like hard nut of a desire to be invisible more of the time. There's the kind of the acute focus that we can put on children, and the wanting to be able to just be inside the reverie and the magical world of wandering through the brush, and to be able to just have that invisibility. And
mhm.
then there's the question of what kind of gaze are we exchanging with wild creatures when we do have encounters with wild creatures. And there's a whale and there's a wolf in here as well. And so yeah, seeing is big. um, and in terms of how to get people to, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't. I would hope. I wouldn't want anything to ever feel preachy,
mhm.
or instructive in the book. But I hope that it's speaking to those kinds of threads, just that are already in people. Of, yeah, we love this. How
Yeah,
can we care for it?
and that there is hope, but not if we're not looking, right? Like if we're not seeing what's right in front of us. And
Yeah.
when you, because I know that a number of different things happened before you sat down to actually write this book, like a number of different things came together or converged. What um, of that exploration I'm like trying to figure out the best way to do this, but how in all of those different things that you were writing about or experiencing, how did you come to this, that this is what it was going to be about, that this is how you were going to bring the ocean and the boat builder and trauma and grief all together into this. Was there a moment like early or this is a writer asking a writer, was there a moment where you thought, oh, I'm gonna put this all together?
The writing happened over such a long period of time that, and so that there, as I said, the first section had been written, and it's kind of set aside, and then there were years of time before I met the boat builder again, or ran into the boat builder again, and started to follow it. And at that point, um, it, I think it just sort of converged that I was learning more about the islands of plastic in the oceans and the effect on whales and so many other marine creatures. And then in starting to follow the story, like the pieces about my childhood and my mother's childhood were very, very resisted and really came out just through the writing itself and sort of asked to be followed. So there wasn't ever that like there had it's funny though, because I was going to say there wasn't ever that moment of stepping back and seeing, I'm
Right.
going to choose to bring all these things together. Except that when I looked back, 8 years later on, no, not 8 years later, there was the 8 years, then I saw him again. And then I started to do a bit of a mind map or a bit of brainstorming around it. And that those early pages sort of got left aside, and then I worked for a few more years on the book. And when I came to the period of final revisions, I looked back at the notes that I had made around that time of just starting to take the darker turn, and I saw that actually all of the elements were already there. And it took me the years later of tinkering and of thinking that I had a revelation much later, but it had been there earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I have a couple of questions, I want to talk about language and structure, just because I know we've got a lot of writers here, and I like asking writerly questions. But before we ask those questions, I want to just remind everybody: feel free to ask a question in the chat, and Kaylee will present it on your behalf. But Jessica, you mentioned childhood, and that's a very big theme in the whole Singing Ocean. And I'm wondering if you would share an excerpt from one of those sections of the book.
Sure. Yeah. Great. So, okay. This section is called The Beginning, No Further Back. Go back to the beginning. Is there a further back than this? That other island, a tent, my mother and my father. Is there something further? Is there a thin skin of water flowing endlessly? Me, a pearl in the inland sea, all was dark and sure. Sometimes night is the surest thing there is. Whose truths are these? Shake yourself out like a shoe. Not all of this belongs to you. Heart beating when the body is the size of a grain of rice, chambered already. How do you shield someone who's inside you from what's inside you? Despair I don't know how to shake, tipped over like an old shoe. Elements added, osmosed. Outside the plantain grows day by day, matching the child millimeter for millimeter, the wild rhubarb, forsythia blooming at her birth. Added, osmosed, the elbows can bend now and the knees. The name has changed, embryo to fetus. How do you shield? Write a word on the walls of this room your body is making. First house for the pearl fetus. Choose a good word, a strong word, a word that comes in a good way. How do you shield someone? Loon calls, stars call. Heed the stars call in this island. Swim. What you can't see can hurt you, but it won't, not tonight. Oh, grant her the gift of phosphorescence, of innocence again. Inside the way the heart beats, chambered already. The heart howls, restless as a wolf to escape. Knees and elbows bend, the space between stars stays constant. No, it doesn't. Nothing alive stays constant. Did I choose the whale, or did the whale choose me? that was a little before childhood, all within the womb, but
Yes,
definitely.
I love that. I mean, that's the moments when I just felt not panicked, but just anxious, and I had to close it just in imagining that the trauma and living with it with joy and happiness. In that too, there is the narrative voice, I guess, that shows up at the beginning, and in a lot of moments through the book, there are all caps with no caps in these blocks of conversations, which at first I thought was between the narrator, you, and the boat builder, but then I wasn't so sure. It seemed uh, like an internal conversation at some point in time, and I actually had to go back and read it to see if I was missing who was the all caps and who wasn't. But I wanted to talk to you about that structure in choosing to have this not explicit dialogue happening throughout the book,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
explicitly marked dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are the all those conversations with all caps, and then also conversations with the story, and also dialogues with transgression, and the all caps I feel serves. I like that. I like that there was a bit of a mystery to it, and that you went back looking. And I want there to remain something mysterious of him.
Okay.
I do think of it as a he, but I think that what feels so essential that he brings in into this very lyrical and sometimes very internal book is just these injections of like, let's what is actually happening, or humor, or crassness or boisterousness, and that for me in the writing helped me along, and also I think in the story helps it along, so that in a way is like another counterpoint piece of we can have the very lyrical, and then but we can also, it can be right side by side with sailor slang. And yeah. Oh, I can't hear you.
Concrete language.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was, did I get muted because of the dogs, Haley? Um, yeah, there people have entered the house, so I apologize for the dogs barking. Um, I'm not sure if we have any questions, but I wanted to talk about language too, because as a translator, at the beginning and at a couple of points through the book, we get French,
Mhm.
and you talk about, or the narrator talks about, how there are some words in French that just say better
Mhm.
the emotion or the emotions you want to convey, or that they have a depth to them. And I wanted to talk about that as a translator, how challenging it is when you sit down to write something in the English language, and you know that there's just a better word in French. There's a better word in another language that says exactly what you want to say. And yet you've got a reader who is English, and will not get that emotional uh, depth that you want to
Mhm.
convey.
Yeah. Yeah, so anywhere that I did allow the French to insert itself or to creep in, I was careful. I didn't want to do anything as blatant as having the translation right there, but I
Mhm.
was really careful to position it in a way where um, what has been said in French is semi-repeated, right, either right before or right after it, and or that the context is like well established enough, we're held within it, so then that just the music of a word could be there and
Mhm.
could exist even for someone who wasn't understanding necessarily the entire echoes and meaning of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And because the boat school was French, then it felt really fitting to have the French be a presence there.
Mhm.
um, and yeah, there's one point at which I look at the trial and the transcriptions of the trial and Kamenev's words,
Mhm.
and sometimes those moments were really fascinating to me, of either what the judge said or what he said, and then the way that something would be really lost in translation, some nuance. And so then I kind of explore it, talk about it in the book around, this is what this is what's present in the French, and this is sort of the breadth of what's being given here, and the impossibility of giving a direct translation. Although there's one moment that where I say really clear, all caps says really clearly, this one bears direct translation.
Mhm.
Um, and in one of the moments in the trial, where Kamenev is speaking about his crimes. So yeah, I hope that the French in the book isn't alienating to English readers, and um,
Yeah, I didn't find it at all. I mean, I'm a dog ear kind of person anyway, but I try my best to not stop reading to look something up, because I
Mhm.
feel like that nullifies the experience of the moment. But I do dog ear things so that I can go back and just investigate the language or investigate the moment in a different way.
Yeah,
um, but I don't think that it added to be honest, when I looked up definitions of words, I don't think that it added to the text. It was deep enough as it was, even though I didn't really know,
right, right.
the translation of the word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kaylee, do we have any questions before I take over?
Yeah, we just got a question from Anne Marie. And Anne Marie asks, with the different themes / dialogues in this book, did you have a structure in mind when you started it? And how did it evolve as you wrote it? Was there a structure that maybe referred back to the ocean in your mind?
um, I'm only laughing because Anne Marie and I were recently in a writing workshop together, where we were really encouraged to have some kind of metaphor for the work as we went through it, which is a beautiful way to approach a piece of work in progress. Um, in this one, I didn't have it in the process of writing. I didn't have like a single image that I kept returning to, and I think it was more in the way of like cooking, and you know, adding a bit of a sweetness to a dish, and then realizing that you needed to bring in a little bit of spice to balance that out, and then adding a little bit more umami to it, and just keeping the thing in balance. So if I was going too internal for a while, then I would know that there needed to be an injection of some other voice, whether it was story or all caps, and and then sort of the positioning of pieces was moving until the very end, and you know, kind of deciding how to have there be, you know, bits of suspense, although it's not suspenseful in the way that a novel is, but have it be um, set up in a way where you're drawn to keep reading, but you know enough to keep going. So it was more that kind of way than having a metaphor for it when I went in.
I love that. I love the idea of seeing that that something is too sweet and you have to go and add a bit of spice to it. Was that something that you do? Is that something as a writer you do as you're writing? Like you're recognizing as you're writing that something is going down a road, like going down the sweet road, I guess, and that you have to stop yourself? Or is that something that you notice on revision or when you're reading it out loud
Hmm.
and hearing it for
Yeah,
yourself?
I notice it as I'm writing, but I'm just remembering too, as a further answer to Anne Marie's question, that at a certain point when I'm writing, I do really like to work with the pages up on the wall. And so there were a couple of months at the end where I had a room in the house with the pages covering two of the walls, and this is the first time I've done this, but I used colors to mark out threads, and so I could see kind of if there was a lot of green here and then a swath without green, and to try to also mix it in that way of
Right.
having the threads be present enough throughout, and having it working on it in a visual way. That's a really important piece to me when I write.
Right. So that the story arc of the boat builder was one color
Yeah,
and the ocean was, oh, that's great. That's a
yeah,
really good,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And all caps, I think, had a color too, because it felt like enough of an element to be something
Mhm.
to be concerned about balancing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then childhood, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, all caps was an obsession for me throughout the, because there is a chunk where all caps disappears.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm
true.
like, where's all caps?
Yeah.
Where is all caps? I think we have one. Do we have one more question, Kaylee?
Yeah, we have one more question, and that question is from Ani. And Ani asks, in what ways may the process of translation have informed your writing of this book and or what you're currently writing?
A good question from a fellow translator. Thanks, Ani. Um, uh, huh. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that one. I feel like I'm thinking
We're
a
going to
lot about,
talk about what you're working on next too.
right.
So feel
Okay,
free
so
to.
I can lead into that a little
Yeah.
bit. I am in what I'm working on now, which is nonfiction about motherhood and writing and translation. In that way, translation is very present because I'm writing from, it's nonfiction about me, about my work, and my mothering to young twins. Um, and I one of the things that I love thinking about with translation is the space between languages. And so I've I've read other authors describe this space between, and I've described it or felt it myself as this sort of shadowy corridor between French and English. For me, that's what I work between. And the space we go into, even just working in English, actually, the kind of the behind or before words that we access when we're writing, and how to describe and compare that place, which feels very liminal. And I'm there's a liminality also I found in early motherhood, of just this kind of constant. I described it as a constant twilight where I just, I was so sleep deprived and kind of wandering through the house in a state of wonder as well, of these two little beings. But the sort of, so the enjoyment there is in liminality, and I do find that in the work of translation and accessing that space between or before or behind words.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. And what, so the, is the memoir, is it going to be written as prose, or are you working? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
leap. It's a leap out of poetry into islands of prose. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wondering, I was like, that would be magical experience if I
Yeah.
could read I mean, poetry as motherhood, because it's such a huge part of my life as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing the whole Singing Ocean with us. It really is an incredible book. If you're here and you haven't read it, we have 2 copies that we're going to raffle off from Nightwood Editions. They have donated 2 for us. If you have read it, feel free to email me. Either way, you have to email me at junctionwrites@gmail.com. And if you'd like to nominate and gift it to someone else, feel free to give me their name and address, and Nightwood can email it directly to them. Saves you about $10 in postage. That's the average cost of sending a book by regular mail. So feel free to do that, Kaylee. The first winner.
rattling around. All right, so our first winner today is Anne-Marie Nakagawa.
Yay! That's
All
awesome.
right. I have like too many papers in here. All right, and the second one is for Frances Boyle.
Yay! So exciting. I'm looking right at you. So Kaylee will put our email address in the chat, and you can just send me your full name and address, and I'll send it to Nightwood, and they will send that to you. They're usually really prompt, so that's great. Jessica, thank you so much again.
Thank you to you for your wonderful questions, and thanks for having me. Yeah.
It's great. So we'll have a recording available and up on our YouTube channel at some point. We'll share that on our social media channels. Please follow Jessica on social media if you're not already. Kaylee has shared all of that in the chat as well. And I hope you can join us on November 7th when Holly Gattery is going to join us with her memoir, Fuse. And that is it. That is all. Thanks again. Take care, everybody. Bye.
That was great, Jessica.
Oh, thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And I get a copy of your book now. It's exciting.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.